Really, you are so insensitive and clueless. Can you hurry up and proceed with the divorce with Thomas? My in-laws always hurl abuse at me and make demands. And recently, the word divorce has started to come up frequently. Paula, you said something terrible and it made my mom cry. I care about my mom, so if you can't get along with her, I seriously think we should consider divorce. There's no way that mother-in-law cried because of me. Thomas casually lies about such clear falsehoods. I was fed up with it. Wait, why is everyone living in my apartment looking at me? You wouldn't think these are the same people who always talk about divorce. It's always the same pattern. They only bring up the word daughter-in-law when it suits them. Since you married into this family, you should take care of us, including finances and a place to live, because you are the daughter-in-law. I calmly responded to my mother-in-law's rude remarks. What? I'm not married? You know. Even they looked surprised. All three looked like deer caught in headlights, totally dumbstruck. What? What? I didn't say anything wrong because it was the truth. Meeting Thomas at a place where I was supposed to find happiness may have been my mistake. Was it fun for them to deceive someone like me? A naive and foolish woman in her 40s who mistook their feigned kindness for affection? They used me like a slave, demanding money. Had they ever seen such lowly figures reflected in the mirror? Their laughter sounded like the loud cackles of demons. I hope they continue laughing as they go to hell. I hope they suffer greatly. I will never forgive them. My name is Paula Miller, a 40-year-old housewife. Last year, in my late 30s, I married Thomas, whom I met at a matchmaking party. Invited by a friend of the same age, it was my first time attending such an event, and I was quite nervous. At the party, we had a short time frame to converse with each man. This was the perfect opportunity to showcase myself, but I was bad at talking. I struggled to find the right words and ended up wasting the time without making much of an impression. I might not be cut out for marriage. Just when I began to think this, the last person to appear before me was Thomas, who was the same age as me. Though not particularly handsome, his gentle demeanor and warm smile eased the tension that had built up. It's nerve-wracking to be here, isn't it? I'm not used to this either. Saying this, Thomas gave a shy smile. Other male participants were accustomed to these parties and would quickly throw questions, even within the limited time. I couldn't handle this well, and many men left sighing, moving on to the next woman. However, Thomas didn't bombard me with questions and listened attentively to my awkward words. I told him that I was homeschooled with few chances to interact with men and that my mother had raised me alone, expressing my desire to marry soon to reassure her. He listened to my story with a smile and nodded. For the first time at the very end, I felt comfortable. However, Thomas was popular, and during the free time, he was constantly surrounded by other female participants. There were many women here wanting to marry. I might miss my chance while I hesitate. Just as I gathered the courage to speak to Thomas, the bell rang to signal the end of free time. It's over. I didn't do anything. In the venue, those who became a couple received applause from everyone. As we were about to leave the venue, and while I was being comforted by the friend I attended the party with, an announcement came. Thomas and Paula Miller, you are a couple. Congratulations. Thinking it was my last chance, I had written Thomas's name under. The man I was interested in. Surprisingly, Thomas had also written my name. Encouraged by my friend, who was even happier than I was, I headed to the stage. I want to spend more time with you, Thomas said, and I nodded vigorously. As applause filled the venue, we were officially established as a couple. Being considerate of the situation, my friend left first, and Thomas and I continued our conversation at a family restaurant. I also want to reassure my parents. Actually, I was also homeschooled, so I'm not sure how to interact with women. That's why, when I thought how similar we are, I became interested in you," Thomas said shyly. I grew even fonder of him as he spoke. Later, we talked about our favorite music and the activities we were involved in during our student days. Surprisingly, Thomas participated in theater in his high school days. I used to gather with friends who aspired to be actors, and we would film short dramas on our smartphones. Embarrassingly enough, I once had such dreams too. Thomas smiled shyly as he spoke. That was how Thomas and I met. From there, our relationship began. Since we met at a matchmaking party, our relationship progressed with marriage in mind. Soon after we started dating, I had the chance to meet Thomas's parents. Both were like Thomas, greeting me with kind and gentle smiles. I thought they might expect me to become a housewife once married, but neither Thomas nor his parents criticized the idea of me continuing to work. My mother lived far away, and I couldn't visit her often, but his parents were gracious and warmly told me not to worry about it. I learned that his parents had also pursued theater and had met in a drama troupe. Understanding that Thomas's aspiration to become an actor was influenced by them made sense. Looking back, I should have realized it then. I was completely oblivious to the fact that everything was just an act, and I proceeded to marry Thomas. That was the beginning of hell for me. I never had a father, and my mother worked tirelessly to raise me alone. Perhaps because of that, I strongly desired a warm family environment. After marrying Thomas, we rented a 2-bedroom apartment as our new home. Soon after moving in, my in-laws started to visit often, and we spent many enjoyable times together. As far as I can remember, it might have been the first time I ever felt the warmth of a family atmosphere. Not long after, when we visited Thomas's relatives to greet them, they seemed very surprised that he had gotten married. "You know I'm not good with women, right?" My relatives were worried about that too. Thomas said this when he returned home. My relatives, too, must have wished for my mother to find peace of mind as soon as possible. Thinking about it, I felt truly fortunate to have met Thomas and married him. When I called my mother to tell her we had submitted our marriage registration, I could hear her crying tears of joy on the other end of the phone, and I felt relieved that I could finally repay her kindness. Paula, thank you so much for marrying Thomas. From now on, we are family, so please treat us like your own parents. My mother-in-law said this kindly, and I felt like I was about to cry. With a kind husband and in-laws, and the ability to reassure my mother, I felt a deep sense of happiness. However, that happiness did not last long. About 3 months after officially marrying Thomas, when I returned from work, my in-laws were sitting on the sofa in the living room. I thought, that's unusual because my in-laws, who had been frequent visitors in the beginning, had been coming less and less recently. Thomas had not yet returned home, and they seemed to have been waiting for me, staring at me as I entered. "Hey, you're late. We're tired of waiting." When my father-in-law said this, I had a bad feeling. It was a slightly aggressive tone that had never been directed at me before. Really, coming home this late even though you're a wife, what a luxury. Have we spoiled you so much that you've become arrogant? I couldn't hide my surprise at these words. They were completely different from the kind words my mother-in-law had previously spoken. Moreover, it was just past 5 p.m., so it wasn't even that late. I couldn't understand why she would say such a thing. What are you dawdling for? Come here right now. We have something important to discuss. Following my mother-in-law's directive, I attempted to sit on an empty spot on the sofa. Hey, who gave you permission to sit? A wife isn't allowed to sit like that. I was scolded for standing and yelled at for trying to sit. I was utterly confused. In front of a bewildered me, my mother-in-law pointed to a piece of paper on the table and said, "For now, could you sign this?" Looking at the paper, I was shocked once again. It was unmistakably a divorce form. What? A divorce form? Why? We just got married. My mind was filled with question marks. I couldn't simply reply okay to the demand to just sign the papers. As I grew increasingly confused, my mother-in-law said, "It's good that you're such a feather-brained daughter-in-law. It was easy to deceive you with our acting. Where did you think such generous in-laws existed? Be happy that you got to enjoy a little bit of happiness. Playing a good mother-in-law is tiring." She then sat down on the sofa and lit a cigarette. I was witnessing a side of my mother-in-law I had never seen before. Even when I was told it was all an act, I couldn't quite believe it. I had never imagined that the kindness and fun times of the past few months were all a performance. As I struggled to understand, my father-in-law said irritably, "Get it through your head already. You're really stupid. It was all an act." The relatives always laughed at Thomas, saying he could never get married. They said they'd give him $10,000 if he managed to get married, so we married him off. Everyone was so surprised. We got the $10,000 and ideally, we wouldn't need you anymore. My father-in-law explained that they were told they might have to return the money to the relatives if they divorced too soon, so they planned to keep the marriage going for the time being. Why they were trying to get me to sign a divorce form was beyond me. The divorce form is just in case. If it weren't for the financial issues, I'd want to divorce you right away. I don't want to leave my beloved son with such a foolish daughter-in-law. Does Thomas know about this? Is he also part of this act? While I was trying to calm down and think, my mother-in-law pushed the divorce form towards me. Looking closely, Thomas's name was already filled in. Did he write it himself? "Paula, if you understand, then don't just stand there, start preparing dinner. Thomas will be home soon. Make sure you prepare enough for us too. Don't be lazy. Treat us like your real family, will you?" Laughs. My mother-in-law laughed maliciously while smoking her cigarette. "I want a thick steak tonight. If we don't have any, go out and buy some right away." My father-in-law commanded, almost as if chasing away an animal. Unable to retort, I left the living room, clutching the divorce form and shoving it into my pocket. The kind in-laws I knew before were just an illusion. When I realized that the past 3 months of happiness had all been just an illusion, my heart filled with sadness and frustration. Wiping away tears, I left the house to go shopping. Thomas returned home while I was cooking the thick cuts of meat I had bought, which his parents were eating. "Thomas, welcome back. Paula has really outdone herself, making us eat such cheap meat. This is why children raised by single mothers are no good. They have no sense of taste." While complaining, my mother-in-law continued eating the meat. Even though she called it cheap, for me, it was quite expensive. It felt like they were belittling my mother, and it upset me. While I was feeling conflicted, Thomas kindly said in his usual gentle tone, "Hey, that looks delicious. Paula, can I have some too?" Seeing my visibly relieved expression, Thomas looked back at me curiously. My mother-in-law silently gave me a look that seemed to say, "Don't say anything unnecessary." I decided to wait and see a little longer, and began to cook meat for Thomas. Although I was relieved that Thomas seemed his usual self, knowing the true nature of his parents now made future interactions with them dreadfully depressing. Did he really marry me just for financial reasons? At the very least, I wanted to believe that Thomas genuinely chose me. That's when I remembered the divorce form I had stuffed in my pocket. Did Thomas really fill it out himself? I hadn't confirmed it yet, but considering the situation, It's possible that one of his parents had filled it in. If Thomas was unaware, that divorce form should be invalid. If that's the case, it might even lead to legal issues. Why are his parents so desperate to see us divorced? I understand that it might be hard for them to let go of their son, but Thomas is no longer a child. There will come a time when he must leave his parents' home, and if we continue to live together, we might eventually have children. When that time comes, perhaps his parents will change their minds. Also, if I can prove myself as a capable daughter-in-law, they might come to accept me. Thinking this, a glimmer of hope began to appear in my heart. "All right, I'll try a little harder," I murmured quietly as I cooked the meat for Thomas. However, after that day, the attitude of my in-laws continued to deteriorate. I had continued working after getting married but had adjusted my hours to be shorter. My in-laws started timing their visits to be just before Thomas came home, ensuring they had a few hours at our place. Thomas trusted his parents, so they had a key to our house. This allowed them free access to come and go as they pleased. Honestly, their frequent visits were troubling. However, I don't own anything expensive, and I always carry my valuables with me, so I reluctantly allowed them to enter. Every time they visited, they would complain, "How rude of you to make our son live in such a small, old apartment. This place feels steeped in poverty. Don't you know there are much nicer houses out there? It's pathetic being born poor, isn't it? I wish we had a prettier daughter-in-law. Looking at you doesn't provide any relief to the eyes." They would grumble about the apartment and me. "We live in this apartment because it fits our financial situation. Thomas's income isn't as high as his parents think. Even combined with mine, it's just enough for us to live a decent life." However, due to his pride, Thomas hasn't been able to disclose this to his parents. Not only do his parents frequently complain about me, but they also use me as an errand runner. On weekends, they force me to clean their house and tend their garden, insisting, "Don't complain, it's a daughter-in-law's duty." I feel more like a servant than a daughter-in-law. Despite this, driven by a desire to be accepted by them, I had willingly taken on any chore they had asked of me. There were many times I wanted to complain to Thomas, but since these were important people to him, I kept my feelings to myself. This situation had been ongoing for several months. It was almost a year since Thomas and I got married, but his parents' attitude hadn't changed. To them, I was merely a servant. Our house wasn't far from his parents, and they made unreasonable demands at all hours, early in the morning or late at night. Often, these tasks, like changing a light bulb or removing a bug from the house, were things they could easily do themselves. If I showed even a hint of displeasure, they would threaten and say, "We're old. What if we get hurt doing these things? If we get injured, we'll scream that the daughter-in-law abused us," displaying a childish and shallow attitude. To avoid escalating the issue, I just quietly complied with their demands. Thomas was my only support, but the time he spent at home had significantly decreased since the harassment from his parents began a few months ago. He said it's because his responsibilities at work had increased, leading to more business trips and overtime. "I'm sorry I have to leave the house so often. Please take care of Mom and Dad," Thomas told me before leaving. Seeing this as an opportunity, his parents had become even more demanding. Lately, they also started to ask for money more frequently. Both of his parents took early retirement and were now unemployed. Perhaps their boredom was the reason for this? However, the fact that his parents were unemployed and me giving them money were separate issues. Since they retired early, they should have received a retirement payout, and they should be receiving a pension. Additionally, they received money from relatives when we got married. Despite that, I had given them money several times, saying just this time. Having been single for a long time, I managed to save a considerable amount, which was more than most women my age. I saved this money for future expenses. Deciding to give money to my in-laws from our living expenses was not something I could decide alone. I told Thomas that we need to discuss it if we are to give them money regularly. However, my mother-in-law objected. "Why do you need to consult Thomas? Just give us the money you earned. Your money belongs to us. Hand it over without complaining." And she tried to forcibly take my wallet. Shocked and frightened by this unreasonable behavior, I decided to talk to Thomas about the situation. That day, Thomas said he had to work overtime and didn't get home until after 1 a.m. I wondered if there really was a workplace that required such late hours. Though I had my doubts, opportunities to talk with the busy Thomas were rare. It was late at night, but since I finally had a chance to talk, I opened up about the financial demands from his parents. "I'd like to help if we could afford it, but it's tough right now, isn't it? Could you maybe talk to your mom about it?" I suggested. Unexpectedly, Thomas immediately responded, "What? Why not just give them the money? Just give them all of your income. What's there to worry about?" His reply was as if my concerns were unreasonable, almost as if it was obvious to do so. He said it kindly, but I couldn't understand the meaning. If I give my whole salary to your parents, what will happen to us? We need to pay rent and utility bills, right?" I explained the obvious to him. As far as I know, Thomas's salary was much lower than mine, even with my reduced hours. Living on his income alone would be very difficult. Thomas looked slightly displeased and said to me, "I know about the utility bills. If we run short on living expenses, just take a loan from a consumer finance company. Of course, it should be in your name since we're giving your salary to my parents. You should take responsibility for it. Make sure the debt is in your name. It's got nothing to do with me." His words seemed logical on the surface, but were actually incomprehensible. Did Thomas really think that way? I couldn't feel the kindness I knew from him in his words last night. Eventually, Thomas yawned deeply and said, "I have to get up early tomorrow, so I'm going to bed now." And he went to bed. I spent the whole night on the sofa in the living room, unable to sleep. The next morning, I left the house before Thomas woke up. Since I had some time before work, I decided to spend it at a nearby cafe. I had prepared a simple breakfast for Thomas, so there shouldn't be any problem for him to eat. Honestly, I didn't want to see his face. I couldn't believe the words he had said last night. He spoke so calmly, it made me doubt myself. I couldn't understand what Thomas was thinking, and I felt anxious about what would happen next. We need to have a proper discussion. I left the house this morning as if I was running away, but I resolved to face my relationship with Thomas squarely. Though I was sleepy from lack of sleep, flipping this mental switch helped me focus on work. After leaving the cafe, I went to the office and spent the day there. I managed to finish my work and thought about what to say in the upcoming discussion with Thomas as I hurried home. I'm not good at expressing myself, so I wanted to organize my thoughts in advance. I hoped that my in-laws wouldn't come over tonight. Their presence tended to complicate things. When I reached the apartment and tried to unlock the door, something fell off. The door was already unlocked. My in-laws might have already arrived. I intended to ask them to leave today, and opened the door. Instead of my in-laws, I saw unfamiliar shoes in the entryway. They were Thomas's shoes. He usually came home later than me or had to work late into the night, but it seemed he had come home early today. With a heavy heart, I took off my shoes and headed toward the living room. From there, I could hear Thomas and his parents chatting happily. They seemed to be enjoying themselves with drinks. Thomas's voice sounded cheerier than usual as he said, "A simple-minded wife is the best. From now on, I'll be giving all of Paula's salary to you, Mom and Dad. Paula just accepts whatever I say." Hearing this, his parents laughed loudly. Children from poor families will believe anything if you're just a bit kind to them. She still thinks you are a kind husband, which is funny. You're the best at acting." I stood frozen, overwhelmed by despair. Everything went dark before my eyes, and I staggered but managed to steady myself. Indeed, the kind Thomas I thought I knew was also an illusion. It was tough finding a suitable woman at the matchmaking party. I wanted someone quiet, not used to men, and obedient. Even though I would get money from the relatives, I didn't want to marry an ugly woman. Hearing this, I wanted to block my ears, unable to bear the words I was hearing. Now that a year has passed since our marriage, no one will complain if you get divorced soon. Where's the divorce form you wrote before? Well, if it's not here, you can just write it again. Next time, pick a woman with a decent face. That poor face made even the food taste bad," said his father, and Thomas and his mother burst into laughter again. If only she had been wealthy, at least someone who wouldn't live in such a cheap apartment. My heart pounded violently. My mind went blank, and tears flowed uncontrollably. The divorce form that my mother-in-law had once thrust at me had indeed been written by Thomas. I had believed that marriage would bring me happiness, yet why did I have to suffer like this? From the beginning, his parents never intended to accept me as family. Thomas was the same. He might have been ridiculed by his relatives, but he married me for prestige and money. There were times I felt happy and thought I had a warm family, but all of that was just an act, an illusion. Since her mother is a single mom and poor, she won't easily agree if I bring up divorce. If that happens, we'll just say Paula was bullying you, Mom and Dad, and get divorced, blaming it on her, and claiming the property settlement. Make sure you put on a great act then, Thomas said, chuckling. Responding as if on cue, his mother said, "Leave the acting to me." Playing a mother-in-law exhausted from being bullied? Easy as pie. As she laughed heartily, I felt as though all emotion was draining from my heart. Beyond the door were devils disguised as family. I felt nothing for these devils. I just wished that they would go to hell. Without entering the living room, I left the house. I decided to spend the night at a friend's place, someone I had gone to the matchmaking party with before. My friend welcomed me warmly, a stark contrast to the demonic nature of my mother-in-law. Meeting Thomas at a place where I was supposed to find happiness may have been my mistake. Was it fun for them to deceive someone like me, a naive and foolish woman in her 40s who mistook their feigned kindness for affection? They used me like a slave, demanding money. Had they ever seen such lowly figures reflected in the mirror? Their laughter sounded like the loud cackles of demons. I hope they continue laughing as they go to hell. I hope they suffer greatly. I will never forgive them. The next morning, I left my friend's place and went straight to work. Thomas showed no reaction to the fact that I didn't come home last night. No calls, no messages. Perhaps he's always been that kind of person. I just hadn't realized it, because there had never been a night when I didn't come home. It took a year, but I'm glad I learned the truth. Now that I know that Thomas and his parents are the worst kind of people, I can deal with them without mercy. After finishing my work that day, I returned to the apartment as if nothing had happened. The living room was still cluttered with the bottles and cans from their drinking the night before, along with bags of snacks and piles of leftover food. I cleaned up quietly, feeling nothing. Thomas didn't come home until after 11 p.m. Without saying anything, I simply headed to my room. The next evening, when my in-laws came over and found me, they demanded as if they had spotted prey, "Hey, we want pizza today. Order from that expensive place near the station, and you pay for it. Your money is already family money." Looking at my mother-in-law's greedy expression, I thought to myself, what a greedy and repulsive face. Even after ordering the pizza, they said, Hey, don't you dare eat any. You eating it would ruin the taste of the pizza. If the taste of the pizza feels off, perhaps it's your taste that's the issue, I thought to myself, but I didn't voice this. I certainly didn't want to look at my wrinkled, unclean father-in-law's face either. Paula, could you leave us alone? We want to eat just as a family today, Thomas said with a sinister smile. He might still think I'm fooled by his act. Unfortunately for him, I knew everything. It felt like continuing to participate in a prank after the secret was out. Moreover, it was clear they were excluding me by saying just the family. I returned to my room without a word. A month had passed since then. Thomas continued to come home late last month, and his parents kept up their verbal abuse, unchanged. Recently, the word divorce started coming up frequently from them. Really, you are so insensitive and clueless. Can you hurry up and proceed with the divorce from Thomas? It seemed Thomas was about to put into action the daughter-in-law bullying the in-laws plan he had talked about before. Paula, you said something terrible, and it made my mom cry. I care about my mom, so if you can't get along with her, I seriously think we should consider divorcing. There's no way that mother-in-law cried because of me. Thomas casually lied about such clear falsehoods. I was fed up with it. It seemed that Thomas and his parents were also spreading rumors of daughter-in-law bullying the in-laws around the neighborhood. Such a despicable family. They would do well to use that energy for something more constructive. With the situation potentially affecting the neighbors, I looked up and saw that the moon had risen. Tonight the moon was unusually red, often considered an ominous sign. Perhaps it was the perfect night to banish demons. That night, Thomas and his parents were enjoying drinks in the living room. I decided to interrupt boldly. What do you want? We're enjoying family time right now. Don't disturb us. My father-in-law tried to brush me off, but I fixed him with a stern look. He flinched for a moment, which I did not miss. Excuse the interruption. I just wanted to let you know that I'll be moving out tomorrow. The moment I mentioned moving out, the expressions on all three of their faces changed dramatically. My mother-in-law mocked. So you finally decided to leave, huh? I bet you can't afford anything better, though. Where are you going? To a cardboard box. Thomas and my father-in-law laughed, and even my mother-in-law chuckled. I couldn't understand what they found so amusing and just watched them laugh. After a pause, with tears welling up, my mother-in-law asked again, "So what kind of shabby apartment are you moving to?" I answered calmly, "Actually, it's a new apartment in front of the station. It's a 4-bedroom, much bigger than here." Thomas and his parents couldn't hide their surprise at my response. "Really? An apartment near the station? But those are expensive to buy." Thomas looked at me, puzzled. "I've been saving to buy a home since before I was married. I decided to use that money now," I said brightly. Thomas began to mutter to himself, seemingly in thought. "Is that so? Okay, got it. Ashem, 4-bedroom. Having delivered my news to them, I couldn't wait to leave this house." Despite their initial disbelief and mocking, revealing my independence and ability to move on without them likely altered their perception. I felt a mix of relief and vindication knowing I was leaving this toxic environment behind. Now, I look forward to starting anew in a place of my own, free from deceit and manipulation. I had very few belongings, so I could move out immediately. As I was about to stand up, Thomas suddenly raised his voice. "Paula, I understand how you feel now. Okay, I've decided. From tomorrow on, we, as a family, will live together." He looked at me triumphantly for some reason. I had somehow anticipated that he would suggest this. Pretending to be oblivious, I responded to Thomas. "So, you and your parents will live together in this apartment. That's a good idea. Your parents seem to like it here, and they've always wanted to stay. At my words, Thomas frowned and objected. What? No way we're going to live in this old apartment. We're moving to the new 4-bedroom apartment near the station too. Hearing this, his parents expressed their excitement and joy. That's wonderful. A brand new apartment. We should start preparing to move right away. Let poor Paula stay in this old apartment. The new 4-bedroom apartment will be just for us. Since it's your house, make sure you pay the rent. Thomas and his parents ignored me and excitedly discussed their plans. Truly greedy and shabby people. No, they were downright demonic. I asked calmly while maintaining my composure. Wait, why would all of you live in my apartment? Caught off guard by my calmness, they paused for a moment. Why? You're my wife, aren't you? It's only natural for us to live in the new apartment you got. I sighed deeply. To think that these were the same people who had always talked about divorce. It's always the same pattern. They only bring up the word daughter-in-law when it suits them. Since you married into this family, you should take care of us, including finances, and a place to live. Because you are the daughter-in-law. I responded calmly to my mother-in-law's rude remarks. What? I'm not married, though. All three of them displayed expressions of surprise when I made my declaration. All three looked like deer caught in headlights, totally dumbstruck. What? What? I didn't say anything wrong. What I said was the truth. As I mentioned, I am currently single. I am no longer Thomas's wife or anything of the sort. Therefore, I no longer need or am obligated to live with you all. I clearly stated my position to the three stunned devils. They deceive people with their insensitive acts and even threaten my peaceful life. People like them are better suited for a house made of cardboard. What are you saying? I won't accept divorce. We're going to live in the 4-bedroom apartment. Their refusal to accept the divorce was solely to live in the new apartment, showing how narrow-minded they were. It's embarrassing to think that such a person was my husband for a year. I received the divorce form that you wrote from your mother quite a while ago. I signed and submitted it. It seems you and your parents also wanted the divorce, so I just proceeded with it. The divorce is already finalized, so please rest assured. Upon hearing this, Thomas directed an angry glare at his mother. In response, his mother also became furious. What? You wanted the divorce too? It was all part of the plan to get money from the relatives by acting. You even prepared a script. While shouting these words in anger, Thomas inadvertently revealed more about the family's act. It was you who accidentally spilled that it was all an act, wasn't it? You should have just played the kind mother-in-law until the end. That's why you didn't make it as actors. Suddenly caught in the conversation, my father-in-law joined in. I quit acting for your sake. We prioritized family because you were born. You don't understand that, you foolish son. As this heated exchange continued, I decided to interrupt their argument. Excuse me for interrupting while you're all so engaged, but I have a bit of news. I happened to stop by the relative's place we visited before, since I was in the area for work recently. At the time, the relative's reaction was very striking. They were shocked that Thomas was getting married. When I casually asked about it during my visit, I received a surprising answer. Thomas getting married? I couldn't imagine that. Paula, did you know that Thomas has never held a proper job? Oh, you didn't know? The relative kindly explained the situation. Since graduating from university, Thomas has been going to the casino almost every day. Sometimes he's there from morning till evening. His parents also love the casino, and the whole family has early drink sessions when they win. Oh, you thought he's been working overtime because he's in a responsible position at his company? That could be because he's trying out new machines or visiting new casinos far away. It's terrible. Can't imagine that such a person could be married." Hearing this, all the contradictions were resolved. There were times I returned home to find the three of them drinking together, which must have been them celebrating their winnings. My in-laws were siphoning off my income to fund their casino habits. I had always thought that Thomas was in a low-paying job. This was because I only received a small contribution of about $500 per month from him for living expenses, and I covered most of our expenses with my salary. Considering his pride, I had never said anything, but it turns out there was no pride to consider. He was just addicted to gambling. I am grateful to the relatives for providing me with such crucial information. Thus, I made sure to share the truth with them as well, that this marriage was entirely fabricated and that I was married for financial reasons. The relatives were very angry and said they would demand the immediate return of any money they had paid. Hearing this, Thomas and his parents turned pale with shock. After a while, the fiery-tempered mother-in-law attempted to retort. However, I continued speaking. "By the way, about the rumors of daughter-in-law abusing the in-laws that you've spread around the neighborhood, it turns out that nobody actually believed those stories. In fact, they felt uncomfortable when hearing such rumors were being spread. Your voices berating me were well known around the neighborhood." I said this with a smile. My mother-in-law, trying to argue, was at a loss for words once again. Feeling a sense of satisfaction, I decided to use this moment to bring up even more important matters. There's something even more important we need to discuss. Although I expect to hear from my lawyer soon, I'll give you an overview now. Thomas, you will be facing claims for a division of assets based on your infidelity. Upon hearing my words, Thomas shuddered in surprise. He must have thought he would never be caught. "I heard from a friend who was with us at the matchmaking party. Despite being married, you've been showing up at various matchmaking events almost every day. She even took pictures of you going to a hotel with a woman you met there. While you're trying to push forward with our divorce, you're also looking for your next partner. Your approach is quite careless, isn't it? I've already informed the organizers of the parties that you are married, so you can expect a significant penalty." Upon hearing this, Thomas collapsed to the floor. He held his head, muttering in panic, "What a foolish sight. Why would you make such a mistake? I told you to do it without getting caught." His mother said coldly, "By the way, mother-in-law, father-in-law, I will be seeking compensation from you as well." At this, his parents visibly shook. "Why would you do that? We did everything to make you family. We married our precious son to you, who came from a poor family. Instead of being grateful, you're demanding money from us. That's unreasonable." His father yelled furiously. Still that much energy left? His loud voice was likely heard throughout the neighborhood. It's surprising to hear my father-in-law use the word unreasonable, especially when he himself had taken so many unreasonable actions. On a friend's advice, I had a voice recorder installed in the room for the past month. Your verbal abuse towards me might be legally problematic. I have ample evidence for charges like insult, defamation, and threats. My lawyer will explain the details. Also, recording these conversations is not illegal, so you cannot contest it. Upon hearing this explanation, my father-in-law finally quieted down. In the end, they were just greedy, facade-maintaining gambling addicts. It seems they've run out of vocabulary to argue against me. As I was about to leave the room, Thomas muttered in a faint voice, "Division. What about the division of property? Isn't half of that apartment mine? It's mine, right?" This was Thomas's last attempt. It's commendable that he thought of the term division of property. Unfortunately, I bought that apartment with the savings I had before when I was still single. Plus, I didn't buy it with our life together in mind. So it doesn't qualify for division of assets. You should give up." Thomas seemed to revive momentarily, but then fell silent again. Both my father and mother-in-law slumped down on the sofa, crestfallen. I am grateful for the brief time we spent as a warm family. That's why the shock was so great when I found out everything was a lie. Also, about the poor single mother you keep mentioning, would you mind correcting that? After the divorce, my mother worked hard and climbed up to become the president of a company. She's still busy and seems very happy, and she is my pride. I plan to live with her in the new apartment. With this, I severed ties with this family. From now on, I intend to thoroughly enjoy the time with my beloved mother, which I couldn't fully experience in my childhood. The room had become completely dark, probably because the light bulb had burned out. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. The contract for this apartment will probably be terminated, and the rest I leave to Thomas. He's an adult, after all. Without any sentimentality, I left the three of them in the apartment and walked away. I headed straight to the new apartment where my new life would begin. Indeed, the higher floors are the best. The breeze feels so nice. I watched my mother happily playing on the balcony in the morning as I grounded coffee beans. Both me and my mother like our new apartment. It's comfortable and we feel at home. There's a concierge at the entrance, and the security is excellent, which reassures us. I was a bit worried that my former in-laws might suddenly appear, but it seems they didn't have the courage to step foot here. According to a friend, Thomas has been banned from almost all the matchmaking parties in this area. It's unfortunate for him, but I had hoped for more severe penalties. In the end, it looks like they have started living together in that old apartment. The house where his parents used to live was evicted due to rent arrears. The apartment was in my name, but I explained the situation to the landlord and had it changed to Thomas' name. They couldn't rent another property with Toma, being unemployed and without an income, but they avoided homelessness thanks to the landlord's kindness. Rumor has it that Thomas and his parents have started working. Thomas, in particular, because he lacks specific skills, is doing simple manual labor. Of course, their income is modest. Currently, through my lawyer, I am demanding compensation from them. It hasn't been long since the claim was made, and whether they will pay properly in the future is uncertain. There may also be times when they succumb to the temptation of the casino. However, I intend to ensure they continue to fulfill their responsibilities. Meanwhile, my mother continued to enjoy the fresh breeze on the balcony. "Mom, the coffee is ready. You said you had a meeting this morning, right?" As I placed her mug on the table and told her this, she looked at me with a pleased smile. "Haha. It's truly wonderful to be with family." I felt the same way. After taking a sip of her coffee, my mother said with a gentle smile, "It's very delicious." "Mom is coming here tomorrow," Simon said. "What do you mean, coming?" I asked. "It means we're going to live together," he replied. "What?" "But what about your father's house? There are so many things that need to be done, like selling it or demolishing it, right?" I panicked when my husband suddenly suggested living together with his mom, trying to explain how unrealistic it was. However, he was determined. "That's why Mom is coming here first while we proceed with those arrangements. We decided last night after discussing it." That's absurd. I felt dizzy. Why does my husband always decide things on his own? "And what about your mother's room?" "We don't have a spare room," I said. "Then clear out your room by tomorrow," he demanded. "Don't be so unreasonable. This is our home. Why are you trying to let your mother live here without asking?" "Shut up. I pay the $1,000 rent, so just do as I say. My name is Tanya, and I'm 34 years old. I run a general store. My store is modestly situated on the outskirts of town and operates with the support of local regular customers. This small shop has a homey atmosphere, creating a deep bond between the staff and the customers. I'm very comfortable with the warm and intimate atmosphere of the current shop, and I have no intention of expanding it significantly. I'm satisfied with this scale and want to maintain it as it is. On the other hand, my husband, Simon, is always ambitious, always trying something new. He always sets high goals, and his proactive attitude sometimes overwhelms those around him. Our personalities are very different, which often surprises our friends as to why our relationship works so well. However, I feel that the contrast in our personalities actually complements and functions well together. Hey, are you still cleaning? We have plans this afternoon. Will you make it on time? Don't you have other things to do? The departure time is approaching, you know. As usual, Simon couldn't hide his frustration when things didn't go according to plan. Come on, don't worry so much. It's a relaxing family day out today, so a little delay won't hurt. I calmly replied, "What are you talking about? You always move at your own pace too much. What tasks are still left?" Simon pressed further. "Could you please pack our daughter's things in her usual bag then?" I asked gently. "Fine. Really, you," he said with a wry smile as he went to get our daughter's belongings. Watching his retreating figure, I secretly smiled. My husband, who prioritizes efficiency, gets irritated when I work at a relaxed pace, but this ultimately helps me. He might think he's taking care of me, but in reality, I'm skillfully managing him. His tendency to rush things is significantly influenced by his job and sales at an IT company. In this industry, a moment's delay could give competitors a significant advantage, so he's always chasing results and has very little tolerance for minor mistakes. As a result, he manages himself with a strict eye in his daily work, constantly working under pressure to achieve team goals. While our relationship as a couple is smooth, if we were to work together, our different work styles could be a significant barrier. I feel that my relaxed working style suits me, and I wouldn't function well in an environment that demands the speed that my husband does. In this regard, my father would be a better partner for my husband than I would. My father has been passionate about automobiles since he was young and has built a career as a craftsman in that field. He owns a small building in the town center, where he runs an automobile-related business. When my husband and I first considered marriage, I brought him to first meet my father. That day, they got so caught up talking about work rather than our marriage. That event was 3 years ago, and the memory of that day is still vivid in my mind. "Hey, Dad, I've brought Simon along," I said when we arrived. Just a minute," my father responded. When we arrived home, my father was working on a car and was covered in oil. It was the first time Simon had encountered this scene, and he was a bit overwhelmed by the atmosphere of our home. Our house also serves as my father's auto shop, with many cars neatly arranged for sale on the property, and a 2-story building standing in one corner. The first floor of the building is used as an office and repair area, and the upper floor houses the living space. My mother is inside, so go ahead and enter. I urged my husband. "Wait for me, I'll be right there," my father said, appearing at the entrance of the garage and wiping his hands with a blackened work towel. He then paused, slowly walked towards Simon and me, and greeted us with a firm gaze. His expression seemed ready to welcome a new member to the family. Since the entrance to our house is at the back of the building, we had to head outside first. Once outside, the cars lined up for sale came into view again. Wow, this is incredible. To have such a wonderful car dealership in the city center? You bought the land and building too, right? It must have been a lot of hard work and effort. Simon remarked admiringly to my father. Actually, it naturally happened as I worked with passion on cars. I acquired the land and building quite a long time ago, before prices soared. My father began to explain. His words were tinged with years of experience and solid confidence. It's really impressive. That's forward-thinking action. Have there been any changes in car sales? Simon inquired with keen interest. Yes, lately, cars for collectors sell well. The value of old models has skyrocketed. Sure, there are many stylishly designed cars, but I never imagined when I was young that people would buy cars at high prices just to look at them and not drive them on the roads. My father explained. His voice conveyed a complex mix of emotions, blending adaptation to changes in the industry. I see. That's a significant change, Simon responded. He was clearly impressed. Simon was very interested in my father's stories and actively bombarded him with questions. However, my father did not seem to mind, and he answered politely, as if dealing with a customer. From this conversation, it was clear that their professional interests and passions aligned. It seems that my father also easily switches on when it comes to work. My mother and I are not very knowledgeable about cars, so he must be pleased that Simon shows such an interest. I know all too well that once my father and husband start talking, there's no stopping them. While the two of them were engrossed in conversation, I went up the stairs at the back of the building and entered the room alone. After explaining the situation to my mother, we watched my husband and father chatting happily from the window and couldn't help but laugh. It's amazing they got along so well the first time they met. Really, he might become just like your father in the future. Ahaha. You'll have to keep an eye on that. This is a fond memory from when we had our marriage greetings. We currently live in the residential space above the car shop that my father used to run. Recently, having turned 65, my father closed the car shop and moved to the countryside with my mother. After working nearly 40 years in the city center, they plan to enjoy a rural life together. Thanks to the success of the car shop, my father has enough funds to not worry about future living expenses and decided to semi-retire. When my father decided to move, the family home was left vacant, and he suggested we might live there. Dad has offered us the house to use. What do you think? A. Are you going to sell the house or rent it out? Well, according to Dad, dealing with selling or renting out the house is too much hassle, so if we live there, he plans to eventually pass it on to us. So you mean to inherit the house and land? That's right. The whole process is just too much hassle for him. He's been focused on his work for 40 years and doesn't want any more complications. I see. Maybe him giving you the house now is part of decluttering his life, to not make it too burdensome for him. So how much is the rent? The rent is $1,000. That house was a spacious 3-bedroom, right? For $1,000, that's a pretty good deal. It's close to the city center and has good access to the station. Since Noelle is still a baby, maybe we should consider moving. Hearing that the rent was $1,000, my husband became more open to the idea of moving. My husband has a somewhat high self-esteem. I was concerned that living in my family home might make him feel dependent on my parents, and he might refuse to move. However, once the move was settled, I felt relieved. This allowed my parents to make their decision to move to the suburbs with peace of mind, resulting in a good outcome for everyone. But my husband presented one condition. I'm fine with moving, but I will pay the $1,000 rent myself. It's a decision I make as a man. Yes, I understand. Thank you, I replied. My husband was struggling to accept the idea of relying on my parents. Even though our finances were combined, he insisted on paying the rent himself. His unnecessary pride in such situations could be troublesome. As a result, we ended up living closer to the city center, and our life significantly improved. I was looking forward to more comfortable days ahead. However, since moving into the family home, my mother-in-law began visiting frequently, often staying over. It was natural for her to be interested now that her son and his wife had moved into a new home. But as her visits became weekly, it increasingly became a problem for me. Mother-in-law, you've been coming here almost every week recently, haven't you? You stay over and then go out by yourself, but maybe next time we could go out together, I suggested. Oh, don't worry about me. I want to enjoy some drinks with my friends, and they would feel awkward around you two, she replied. I felt she could be more considerate. Every week when she visited, I found it hard to relax. Lately, going to the theater has become her hobby, and she seems to enjoy it weekly with her friends. After the show, they discuss their thoughts at a restaurant. Since the theater is in the city center, she's essentially using our home as a place to stay. It's really okay, you don't need to worry, she would say. But then, emerging from a long bath, she'd casually eat the expensive ice cream I had bought as a little treat for myself. It was just a small indulgence for me, and I wished she would consider that. If she was worried about how her son was living or wanted to see her grandson, I could understand. But if she is using our house as a place to stay for her personal leisure, I find it hard to accept. So I brought up my mother-in-law's visits to my husband, and surprisingly, he supported her. Mom helps with the housework and even supports us with the kids. Can't you even allow her to go see a play for her hobby? No, I do appreciate the help she provides. But it's honestly exhausting when she comes over frequently without any real need. What? You're not grateful? If you have complaints, you should be perfect in housework, childcare, and your job, so there's nothing to criticize. It was clear that my husband didn't understand my feelings at all. He believed in voicing complaints only after achieving perfect results. This might be appropriate in a workplace, but applying it to family issues meant my feelings of distress were being ignored. Everyone has their limits of tolerance. Honestly, I think my mother-in-law's behavior is a bit unreasonable, even by general standards. The conversation made it clear that expecting my husband to side with me was unlikely. However, I couldn't just let it go. Ultimately, I decided to seek help from a specific person. As a result, my mother-in-law suddenly stopped coming over. Lately, Mom hasn't shown up at all, has she? My husband noted. Really? I replied. Did something happen? Maybe something did. I'm not sure of the reason. I responded to my husband's inquiries with a calm smile. The reason my mother-in-law stopped her visits was because my father-in-law spoke to her. He was a kind and courteous man, so I called him, explained the situation, and asked for help. My husband still doesn't know the real reason behind her cessation of visits, and my mother-in-law has kept that fact hidden. This way, our relationship as a couple wouldn't deteriorate. I'm truly grateful to my father-in-law. However, within a year, he passed away suddenly due to illness, and I was deeply saddened by the loss. I have been receiving help for issues with my husband and mother-in-law for nearly 5 years since we got married. My father-in-law was only 62 years old, and I had plans to repay him for his kindness. However, he passed away before I ever had the chance. At the funeral, while enduring regrets and sadness, I bid my last farewell to my father-in-law. After the ceremony, my daughter and I returned home first. Despite the great debt of gratitude I owed, I felt it was not right for me to stay with my mother-in-law and husband at my in-laws' house. It seemed that neither my husband nor my mother-in-law wanted that either, so I came back home with my daughter. However, the next night, my husband came home and made an unbelievable statement. "Mom is coming here starting tomorrow." Simon said. "What do you mean, coming?" I asked. "It means we're going to live together," he replied. "What? But what about your father's house? There are so many things that need to be done, like selling it or demolishing it." "Right." I panicked when my husband suddenly suggested living together, trying to explain how unrealistic it was. However, he was determined. "That's why Mom is coming here first while we proceed with those arrangements. We decided last night after discussing it." That's absurd. I felt dizzy. Why does Simon always decide things on his own? "And what about your mother's room?" "We don't have a spare room," I said. "Then clear out your room by tomorrow," he demanded. "Don't be so unreasonable. This is our home. Why are you trying to let your mother live here without asking?" "Shut up. I pay the $1,000 rent, so just do as I say." "Are you kidding me? This isn't a joke." I had always avoided direct confrontation with Simon, who is stubborn and unyielding in his views, and instead found ways to skillfully manage his actions and thoughts. However, with the imminent start of life with my mother-in-law tomorrow, there will no longer be time to avoid conflict or subtly influence the situation. Simon seems to think only of the benefits of having another person to help with housework and childcare, completely disregarding my feelings. But it's too domineering for him to expect me to give up my private space for my mother-in-law. Moreover, while our conversation was still unresolved, Simon hurried off to take a bath. Any resistance from me seemed futile. I went to my workroom and decided to prepare a sleeping arrangement for my mother-in-law for the time being. The next day, my mother-in-law arrived, dragging a large suitcase. "Usually I don't only bring one, but it's really tough to travel this far with so much luggage," she said. Since Simon was at work, I greeted her alone. The weight of her luggage must have been a considerable burden for her. She was sweaty and appeared exhausted. However, there was no sign of sadness for her husband, who had passed away just a few days ago. Had she already recovered, or did she not feel sad at all? "Hey, isn't it cleared yet?" "I'm sorry. I was told last night by my husband to clear out the room." "Really useless, aren't you? Hurry up and clear it. Also, prepare some cold milk and cake." There was no cake in the fridge. When I said I would go out to buy some, my mother-in-law sighed. "Oh, what kind of housewife are you? Hurry up. Why do I have to be spoken to like this?" The thought of enduring days like this weighed heavily on me. But this was just the beginning. That evening, when Simon came home, the four of us were having dinner, and my mother-in-law escalated her attacks on me. "I haven't been here in a year, but it's still a nice house," she commented. "Yeah, Mom, why did you suddenly stop coming?" Simon asked. "Your father scolded me. He told me not to visit your place so often. He said it was because Tanya was feeling burdened." "Well, that sounds like Dad. Really, you didn't need to worry about it." "Actually, it wasn't your father who was considerate. It seems Tanya asked him to intervene. She told him she was bothered by my visits and asked a favor from him," my mother-in-law suddenly claimed, leaving me speechless. I had indeed sought help from my father-in-law. Of course, I hadn't been rude. I had merely suggested subtly that she should limit her frequent visits. My mother-in-law seemed to be exaggerating the situation, making herself out to be a victim. "Hey, did you really say that?" "Tanya, I'm sorry. I had no idea I was such a burden. We'll be living together for a long time now. Is that okay?" My mother-in-law was smiling, but her eyes were hiding anger. It seemed she resented me for telling on her to my father-in-law. Her gaze clearly accused me. "Hey, answer me. Did you really say that?" "No, I didn't say it like that, but..." "Oh, is that so? My father said so. Are you saying he exaggerated the story, or are you implying Mom's lying?" "No, that's not what I meant." "But you did say it, right? Really? Doing things behind the scenes is sneaky. Now that we're living together, you should properly apologize to Mom." "Why should it be normal for me to apologize? That's ridiculous." "Mom, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'll make sure she understands." I was completely made out to be the villain and pressured into apologizing, which was truly humiliating. This incident isolated me within my family, creating a 2-against-1 dynamic. The next day, blatant mistreatment by my mother-in-law began. In the morning, I made lunch for both my husband and me, but I found mine in the trash. When I returned home in the evening, my mother-in-law had prepared dinner, but nothing was set aside for me. Although my husband was aware of her actions, he fully supported his mother, only shrugging in response. I have been without support from anyone for a week now, and I can't even ask my father-in-law for help anymore. This obvious harassment has taken a significant mental toll on me. Some people endure such situations for years, even decades, but it seems I don't have the strength to bear it. When I saw my own limits, I found myself in a situation where I had no choice but to ask my mother-in-law for help. "Mother-in-law, could you please watch Noelle for a little while today?" I asked. "Why? Don't you usually take her to the shop with you?" she questioned. "I have to attend a market event for work today. The venue is too large, and I can't bring her along," I explained. "What? She'll start crying as soon as you leave." "This is a bit." She hesitated. "I'm really sorry. Is there any way you could help?" I pleaded. "You really are a troublesome daughter-in-law, always causing trouble." She sighed. "I'm sorry, really sorry." I apologized to her repeatedly. I felt down in the morning, but I had to accept the situation. I was honestly anxious about leaving Noelle with my mother-in-law, but I wanted to believe she wouldn't do anything terrible to a 4-year-old. I told her I would return as soon as possible and left the house. In the evening, driven by worry, I hurried home. I didn't think anything serious would happen, but I needed to ensure Noelle was safe as soon as possible. "I'm sorry I'm back now." I said upon entering the living room. My mother-in-law, engrossed in the television, merely lifted her hand without turning around and continued watching. She probably wanted to focus on her program. I looked around the living room for Noelle, but she was nowhere to be seen. Thinking she might have already gone to bed, I headed to the bedroom. However, Noelle wasn't there either, and I began to panic. I hurriedly rushed downstairs. There, in a place normally used as a storage room, my daughter Noelle was sitting and crying. "Noelle!" I called out. "Mommy!" she sobbed. "What happened? Why are you here?" I asked in shock. "Grandma told me to reflect here because I couldn't eat her food," she explained. What? I was stunned by her words. It seemed my mother-in-law had locked Noelle in the cold, dark storage room as a form of discipline because she hadn't eaten her food. Mother-in-law. Why would you do this? How could you lock Noelle in such a place? It's cold, dark, and scary, I exclaimed, my anger rising. This could be traumatic for a child. I felt furious with my mother-in-law. There's no need to make a fuss. She didn't eat the soup I made. Picky eating isn't good, she responded coolly. I heard that the soup was quite spicy, wasn't it? I questioned. Not at all. It's not that spicy, she claimed. I went to the kitchen and tasted the soup left in the pot. It was indeed very spicy, enough to make my tongue tingle. A child can't eat something this spicy, I protested. Stop shouting. Children should eat what is served to them. That's how they learn discipline, she insisted. But even adults can struggle with this level of spiciness, I countered. Why are you yelling like that? The neighbors will hear, she scolded. Just then, my husband Simon arrived home. Usually he sides with his mother, but I believed that seeing our daughter in such a state, he would support me. However, my hope was quickly dashed. Noelle, you shouldn't be picky. Grandma worked hard to make that. Dad is disappointed. Apologize properly and reflect on your behavior, he said. His response left me feeling even more isolated and betrayed in my own home. My mother-in-law and husband were beyond comprehension. This is no joke. How can you feel nothing when our daughter is subjected to this? I can't endure this anymore. Please leave this house immediately. What? Calm down. Why do we need to leave? Because this is my family home. It's only fair that you two leave. I've told you, putting Noelle in the storage was part of her discipline. That's no reason to be kicked out of the house. That's right, exactly as Mom says. Sure, this is your family home, but I'm the one paying the rent, so technically, this house is mine now. You should be the one to leave, actually. The conversation was pointless. My anger had turned to dismay. Fine, I'll leave. And I want a divorce. That's fine. You never respected my mother. I never thought you were such an unreasonable woman. Then, I'll arrange for a formal rental agreement with my father for this house. Fine by me. Right in the center of the city, this large property with a spacious storage area. I thought the rent was high at first, but for $1,000 to have all this is a no-brainer. Mom and I will live here comfortably. My mother-in-law and husband were satisfied to continue living in this house. Incredibly, the matter of divorce didn't seem all that significant to him. The thought that I had spent 5 years married to such a man filled me with rage. And I could not forgive my mother-in-law for neglecting my daughter. If my husband doesn't think it's wrong, then he's complicit. I packed up and left the house immediately with my daughter. It was strange for me to be the one leaving, but I thought it would hurt my husband's pride eventually. My mother-in-law would surely come to regret this as well. As soon as I left the house, I called my father to explain the situation. Simon did what? So, what are you planning to do? I want you to make a rental agreement with Simon. Oh, using that approach? Then he'll have to leave if he doesn't comply. Before I even finished explaining, my father understood my plan. We are family, after all. We understand each other quickly. A month later, I was divorced from my husband and living in a monthly apartment with my daughter. After the divorce was finalized, I took the documents my father had prepared and went to see my ex-husband and former mother-in-law. Ah, you've come. Is that the contract? My ex-husband asked. Yes, it is, I replied. I was led up the front steps of the house by my former husband and mother-in-law. It was a strange feeling being guided into my own house. Sitting on the living room sofa, I placed the documents my father had prepared on the table. My ex-husband picked up the documents and began to read through them. He quickly pointed out a supposed mistake. Hey, this is wrong. The rent is listed as $10,000. Oh, really? I can't believe such a mistake, I said, pretending to be surprised as my ex-husband and former mother-in-law looked at me coldly. Yes, the rent is indeed $10,000. There is no mistake, I countered calmly. What? Stop joking. The rent was supposed to be $1,000. Are you trying to kick us out by setting such a high rent? I'm not falling for that. This contract is invalid. Don't be ridiculous. Bring a correct contract. My ex-husband seemed triumphant, believing he had seen through my scheme. However, unfortunately for him, there was no mistake in the documents, and I had indeed prepared them seriously and accurately. There is no mistake. This building includes the entire large property, and the first floor is not a residence but houses commercial tenants. It's common for commercial tenants to pay higher rent than residential tenants. When combined, the rent amounts to $10,000. Moreover, this is a central city location. That is the going rate for tenant fees in this area. What? Don't mess around? We're only renting the residential part upstairs. We have some stuff on the first floor, but we'll clear it out soon. That's not possible. My father stated that if he rents this place out, he will do so as a whole, not separately. If there were casual residents upstairs, it would reduce the interest of anyone wanting to rent the commercial space on the first floor. We were able to use this house previously because of my relationship with my father. Now that we're divorced and essentially strangers, there's no more special treatment. From now on, you'll need to pay the market rate for rent. What? The rent has been $1,000 so far, hasn't it? Why? No, mother-in-law. Actually, the rent has been $0 until now. My father allowed me to use it for free. Essentially, it was as if I was not paying any rent. I was supposed to pay him $10,000 annually for property taxes. In a way, that could be considered the real rent. $0 rent? That can't be right. You said the rent was $1,000. That was not true. I said that because I thought your pride would be hurt if you knew you were living here for free. Actually, I saved all the $1,000 you thought you were paying as rent. I also contributed $1,000 each month, saving a total of $2,000 monthly. We continued this for 10 years with the plan of eventually buying this house from my father. This way, everything would be settled transparently, and you would be satisfied. However, there's no need for that anymore. So please leave this house immediately. You can't afford to pay $10,000 a month, can you? Wait a minute. We can't just leave suddenly like that. Well, you can give us a 2-month notice. In that case, you will need to pay 2 months' rent, totaling $20,000. Is that acceptable? Ah. Realizing the contradiction in her own statements, my mother-in-law fell silent. If you cannot pay the rent, please leave. If you do not, I will call the police. That's harsh. My ex-husband and former mother-in-law were trembling and looking down. Eventually, they decided to leave the house. They quickly packed their belongings and moved to an apartment. I had instructed them to vacate within 2 weeks by the end of the month, and they did as instructed. I warned them that staying even 1 day longer would result in an additional charge of $10,000 in rent, which seemed to motivate them. My ex-husband and former mother-in-law have already sold their house and are now living in a cramped apartment. They thought they could take the house from me and lived a lavish lifestyle, purchasing many expensive items. As a result, they faced sudden expenses and nearly depleted their assets, forcing them into living meagerly. Furthermore, they also need to pay child support every month, so they can't afford a luxurious living environment. Well, that is a consequence of their own actions, and there is no room for sympathy. Meanwhile, I have moved back into that house with my daughter, and we are living happily. Also, a trusted friend has started a cafe on the first floor, and I help out there occasionally. The cafe also includes a small space for merchandise, where some of the items from my store are displayed. Every day, being enveloped in the rich aroma of coffee is wonderful, especially when there's the scent of freshly baked cakes. Moving forward, I plan to continue living a fulfilling life, prioritizing my daughter while balancing work and personal life.